So with that, I think we can open it up to questions, and I've tried not to focus on the chat. I think it says there's been quite a few things in the chat, so we'll go right to that. If that's good, Elma, is that a good use of our time next?
Yes, thank you, Kent and Anna. Thank you for your time. We have about 19 minutes, so we have time for questions. So I'll start with the first question. I'm putting a link in the chat. Please kindly fill, it's a post survey to our session, so you can kindly fill it whilst we go on with the Q&A. So I think most of the people we have here are educators and food safety specialists. So there was a question, an interesting question that came up, that consumers are always surprised about the recalls and the outbreaks. So how will you address the questions like, why are there more outbreaks or recalls associated with flour than before? And then Kent.
Half an hour, I'll answer that one, but no, that's a great question. So there's if you look at the overall statistics, and I'll start broad and then I'll bring it into flour, so that our abilities to detect outbreaks are so much better than they were 15 years ago, even 5 years ago. The techniques, whole genome sequencing, I won't go into that, but that is a thing that is allowed, something that before a lot of people had to get sick in order for it to kind of hit the radar and be noticed. And now with these new techniques, they can hone in to even 2 people that got sick. If they have the same whole genome sequence of what made them sick, that can constitute an outbreak, which then they drive very hard to find the source and call it and recall that product. So it is a change in technology, a change in the ability of the regulators, CDC, doctors, those types of things to identify it. For flour itself, as you saw on Anna's chart, that it kind of is ramping up, and that really is a focus of before the STEX or the E. coli really wasn't associated. That was all associated with meats and those types of things. So now with this new learning, it's the questions that the investigators ask. So they can only have so much time, but before, if it was E. coli, they wouldn't even ask if they had eaten a raw dough or flour containing product. Now they do. So that does shift it from the past of where it was with flour related products to now where the flour related products are more commonly a part of the questions asked by the investigators. So hopefully that helps.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. We had another question. Betty started answering the question, but I think we can get more feedback from you. Someone asked that, could you please explain more about how water activity influences the temperature required for kill of pathogens? You mentioned that since flour has a low water activity, the required temperature is higher.
Yes, yeah, and so that's a great question. It gives me a chance to say it again. So hopefully, if you only take a few nuggets out of this webinar, that's one of those, is that there's not this magic temperature of 165 or 160 that you see out there. That's related to meats that are very high water activity. The water activity is related to like the relative humidity of the air. If you put something out, a food out in 70% relative humidity, eventually it will equilibrate to that, and that will be a 0.7 water activity. So think of it that way. Meats are generally in that 0.95 to 0.98. So very, very high water, a lot of water available. So that water helps that killing action. So that's why that 165. When you talk about flour, we're more like at 0.2, 0.3 water activity. And that requires a lot more heat to kill the pathogens in there. You're up, and I don't even want to put temperatures out there because people take it and run with it, but it is much higher than 165. And that's where you have to, like for our process, we have to balance. It's a very, very fine balance of if you get too much heat, then you kill the protein activity or the protein, you actually denature the protein so it can't form that gluten structure and make products anymore that require that. And so that's the difference there. And so that's, but it's much higher. And a great place for this is the Home Baking Association. So if you haven't been on their website, search their website. They have an actual chart for baking that says for this type of a product, you need to hit 185. For this product, you need to hit 200, those types of things. Even for your baked products, there's going to be different temperatures that you need to hit in that final one. And that's on the Home Baking Association's website. You might have to dig a little in their food safety section, but they have a wonderful chart in there.
Thank you. We have a suggestion. Someone suggested something concerning the video. Someone mentioned that perhaps you can explain how to do the sanitize on the counter in the video and give directions. So if you could take note of that. Next question is, do you have a resource on root vegetable flour, such as cassava flour, and safe practices?
Yeah, on those root vegetables, I think, they're going to be equally, I don't have any of the numbers on that. Anna, I don't know if you've looked at that in the past for any of those. No.
We haven't, no.
Yeah, no, that's not in our portfolio. So we haven't investigated that. So I don't even know, wheat flour is a huge one, and we're still gaining information on that. So I don't know that there's any data available, but just by nature that it's being dug out of the ground, a lot of these pathogens exist. Listeria monocytogenes is, pretty much ubiquitous in soil, those types of things. So they will come with a pathogen risk as well. So I would say the same principles that we described here today also would be associated with those types of flours.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And thank you, Jenny, for sharing the Home Bakers Association's link. Thank you very much for sharing that. Any other questions? There's room for questions. You can put up your hand if you want to directly ask your questions instead of typing it. And I'll just ask you to ask your questions. I've put in the survey. Please, again, kindly click and then fill the put survey. We also have FangLab. We have some studies that we've done on consumer studies with wheat flour, very informative. So if you're interested in that, you can go on our website or on our social media platforms and you'd see different kinds of studies we've done on wheat flour. I think Kent mentioned it previously somewhere in his slide. So you can go on our website for more information. We have about 10 minutes for more questions. Kent said, yes. Ask us anything. So
yes, ask us anything.
Anything. We have the Mills team here, so you can ask anything.
And Alma did a kind introduction for me, but it basically just said I'm old and that I've been around a long time. So I've dealt with just about everything in the food industry. So if you have questions even off topic, I'm glad to answer those. But don't need to string it out as well. But on that sanitizing question, and that's a great suggestion to add that to the video. But the surface makes a big difference on being able to sanitize. So sanitation, if you think of it, in the food industry, we talk about cleaning and sanitizing. Those are two separate things. So you can't sanitize a dirty surface is the common thing. So if there's rust or something like that, you're just never going to be able to sanitize it. So the surface that you cook on or that you prepare on is very, very important to be able to clean it and then sanitize.
Thank you. Another question, not necessarily related to food safety, but can you explain the difference between white whole wheat and whole wheat flour?
Yeah, I can jump into that. So white, or what we call a refined flour. So Anna explained that, where we have the different steps in the tempering, we add a little bit of water on it so that it toughens that outer layer or that bran coat. And so if we don't do that and we put it through the mill, and mill are just two big steel rollers that come together, it will just shatter, which is fine for whole wheat because we're just grinding the whole thing. Every bit of that wheat berry gets ground up in there in the US. I'll explain that in a second. But for refined flour, which is the majority of the flour sold, the white, we call it white fluffy flour, it's what we want to do is kind of split that berry open and then scrape out the inside, the white endosperm portion, which is about 75% of that wheat berry. in rough terms, is we try to scrape that out from the inside of that, and then that bran layer goes off as a co-product, most often for animal feed. And so that's a refined flour, is that inner portion that contains the protein and the starch, and there are the major components there. And then a whole wheat flour is just truly what it says, is it's all ground up. A caveat is, if you're in Canada, a whole wheat flour is doesn't have the germ. So there's 3 parts to a wheat berry, and that's the germ is a very high oil content portion that is kind of the essence of the seed that can allow the plant to grow. And so that portion is taken off because it does shorten the shelf life. Whole wheat flours have a much shorter shelf life. And in Canada, the regulations allow you to take that off. So if you're in Canada, you buy whole wheat flour, the germ won't be there. But if you buy whole grain flour in Canada, I believe is the term used, then it would be similar to the US. So that's the difference in those flours.
Great, thank you. Betty has also shared the links to the research studies we've done in our lab, some of the few papers we have, so you can pick up and then just read and study them. Any other questions? If you have any other questions, we have like 5 to 6 minutes we can go through. Yeah. Oh, I had a question actually. I wanted to find out if there are any studies or you have any plans on finding ways to actually make the flour safe in terms of having a kill step, possibly. Are there anything like that, since now the CDC and things have now become more stringent with their methods? Is there anything you now have in place for adding that to your process?
Yep. So we are constantly researching that. And so we do have some tempering aids that we use to help reduce the risk. And we're constantly researching out how else might we do that. As you know, buying a pound of nuts versus buying a pound of flour is a very different price proposition. So flour is very price sensitive. So when Anna and I and a team of us do our research, we're not only looking for what's effective, we're looking at what's cost effective. Because if we say now it's safe flour, well, most people think it's safe. Remember in the beginning I said, why isn't it safe? It's white, it's pure, this and that. So people really aren't willing to pay any more for now it's safe, because they're like, well, I already thought it was safe. So I don't really want to pay any more for that. So we have to be very cost sensitive as well as looking at the effectiveness. But we, as well as other millers, are looking at that and do employ trying to risk reduce that flour.
Okay, great. Any other questions? We have 3 minutes, 4 minutes to go. Any question, anything at all for the Arden Mills team, because we might not get them like this unless another time. So if you have any questions, probably the best time for.
I'll just say thanks for having us. We do appreciate the ability to share the story and share what we're doing and to educate and to understand the risk that it's not just the eggs and the cookie dough or the other portions that people need to take flour very seriously and in your preparation. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Kent. Thank you, Anna. And thank you, everyone, for joining our session. I think if there are no more questions, yes, I see people saying thank you. So I'm assuming it's a good time to log off. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. This is our last session for our summer school. So we'll meet again next year, 2024, during summer for another set of interesting and informative food safety-based sessions. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and do enjoy the rest of the day. We'll be sharing the session recordings with you via email, so kindly expect that later on in the week or next week, most likely. Thank you, Hannah. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.